What's up, Flannelverse? We are back with Adam, ShipMyMoney, Scherer to break down this Thursday night football game between the Cowboys and the Giants. We're going to go position by position, starting with quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, and kickers. We'll take any questions you have as we go. We're not going to be building lineups at the end of this one. I do that on the evening show, but we are not going to do that on this one. I do want to start this show with a little bit of a victory lap. Another spot where I was right, Adam was wrong. The first show that we did of this Showdown show, Adam said that he didn't think he was very good at Showdown. I said I thought he probably was pretty good. He just had not gotten lucky yet. And sure enough, on last Thursday, Adam takes down the Showdown slate for $26,000. So feels pretty good for me to be right on that. Adam, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, felt good. I'm off to a really hot start in Showdown. I have 3 or 4 second best lineups, and then also that win. So nowhere to go but down.
Yeah, you almost took down, was it Monday? There was another, I forget what it was exactly. You got outscored. Oh, you got outscored by the Juju Smith-Schuster touchdown.
Yeah, I lost by 0.2 of a point to the Juju touchdown. In the Bills game on Monday, I got second to the Colts. Needed the Bills defense to get 2 more points. They had an easy defensive touchdown, and the guy just couldn't pick up the fumble off the ground. Okay. So got second in that one. I got second on the Washington slate also. Well, 69th, but second best lineup. So been getting close.
Yeah. I've also been getting very close this year. Have not had one come through yet where I actually won, but I've been had sweats down to the last couple minutes. On Monday, I had thought I had a real shot to win the Bengals showdown, needed Joe Burrow to score that last touchdown, or Chase Brown, or basically anybody other than Zach Moss. I'm not sure if it had been Joe Burrow to Jamar Chase. I'm not sure if my lineup would have been in first. I had a lineup that was up there with Jamar Chase captain, but I know for sure if Burrow had run it in or thrown it to anybody other than Jamar Chase, would have won that one. And then of course it was a Zach Moss touchdown. So that was the actual closest I've been, where it was just all right, if this one play goes the right way, the touchdown pass to T Higgins that he just barely dropped, I think would have been. So yeah, got close, but have not had one come through yet. But yeah, congrats to you on this 26K.
I'm still a little pissed off from the week 1 Thursday night. I had the second best team in the Wildcat, and the difference was just Rice versus Worthy at captain, and Worthy edged him out. And then from that point on, it's just been the Rice show.
Clearly Rice. Yeah. That's kind of rough. I'm still curious how Xavier Worthy is going to end up, because he looked like a clear smash after week 1, but it was limited touches. Are they going to get him more touches now because he's been so good with his limited touches? And so far, not really. I don't know what's going on there.
He's been exactly what I expected so far, really. You're going to have big games from him because he's in an efficient offense and he's going to be a playmaker with studs around him, but he's also not going to get a lot of touches, I don't think.
Yep. All right. Well, we are going to go again position by position in this one. Fantasy Points has made some nice little changes on their site where I don't have to open the tabs ahead of time. It actually moves pretty quickly when I change positions here, which is pretty nice. So if you have not already checked out Fantasy Points, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be using on this show will be Fantasy Points tools and data. Promo code Flannelman if you want 25% off anything at Fantasy Points. I'm also going to be using Roto Grinders Lineup HQ. That's what you see here, to look at Roto Grinders data as well. Look at the projected ownership, etc. So going to be using a mix of tools throughout the show. But we'll start with the Fantasy Points projections. Looking at quarterbacks, we have Dak Prescott and Daniel Jones, the quarterbacks on this one. Dak projecting a little bit better. This is a home game for Daniel Jones and the Giants. Actually closer in projection than you might expect. I think both of these guys, quarterback discussion usually kind of boring because they're usually going to be good plays on a single game slate. I think the projected ownership looks pretty reasonable for both. And let me pull that up here on Roto Grinders. Dak Prescott, 52% projected flex ownership. Daniel Jones at 43% in the flex. And then at captain, we've got Dak Prescott at 16% projected ownership. Daniel Jones at 10% projected ownership. Those numbers all kind of seem fine to me. Nothing really stands out to me in those numbers. I'm going to have a good amount of both these quarterbacks. We had last week the showdown slate we just talked about where that Adam won. It was wow, Aaron Rodgers coming in at 5% ownership seemed like a really good bet. 5% versus 10% to me is a pretty big difference. But I have some interest in Daniel Jones, a captain. But let me hear your thoughts on the quarterbacks in general. See if you have anything more interesting to say about them than I do.
No, I mean, I like both of them too. I actually right now think Daniel Jones is going quite a bit under-owned in general. I have him as one of the most under-owned flex plays. I have him as the most under-owned captain play right now. Cowboys secondary is banged up a bit. You get at least some rushing upside from Jones also. You can pair him with one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. But also another thing that I think is nice about him is that while you do have, third receiving options on the Giants that, maybe they hit a home run, for the most part, their passing is so funneled to Neighbors and Wan'Dale Robinson that you don't run into the issue that you do with some other teams of, even if I get a good game from Daniel Jones, did I pair him with the right pass catchers? Because who knows how it's going to go. If Daniel Jones throws passing touchdowns, it's pretty likely that you know who they're going to. So that, makes it a little bit more likely that when he has a good game, you have the right guys with him too. So I think he's going a bit under-owned for me. I think Dak's going a little bit under-owned at captain, a little bit over-owned at flex, but more in line with the field on him, I think. But Daniel Jones actually stands out to me.
Yeah, Daniel Jones is pretty interesting. Also, like, he hasn't had a ton of success on the ground yet this year, but he does have 19 rushing attempts through 3 games. Also had over 700 yards rushing 2 years ago, just 2 years removed from a 700-yard rushing season. So I'm also curious how you are seeing things come out in the Sims in terms of stacking. I think my general thought on this one, because we've seen so much rushing upside in the past, is you can probably get away with unstacked Daniel Jones in the flex. Probably want to stack him when you have him in the captain spot. I don't think you necessarily need to double stack when you have him in the captain spot. He has enough rushing upside that you don't necessarily need it. I still will. I think that's a way to get unique. So I think I will do some of that Daniel Jones in the captain onslaughts. But I'm curious to hear what you are seeing in your Sims.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much how I see it also. When he is the optimal captain, Malik Neighbors is in that lineup 60% of the time. Robinson's in there 45%. Singletary's in there 41%. So, like, obviously pairing him with Neighbors is really, really good. But I don't think you necessarily have to have any of the other pass catchers. You don't have to have Neighbors. Like, you could go Robinson, Singletary or something, obviously, especially in a one-game slate. But I don't think that you need multiple pass catchers with him because, for one, like you said, there is rushing upside. We haven't seen a good rushing game yet, but for my thing with him is, like, at least he's running. Coming back from, the lower body injuries, my bigger concern was, like, is he just going to be afraid to get out of the pocket and
Right.
run now? And he hasn't been. We haven't seen those big plays yet, but they'll probably come eventually with the opportunity. So there's that. And then there's also just the, this is definitely a game that could just be relatively low scoring. Probably not Patriots low scoring, but, like, this is a game where you could just not get that many touchdowns either, and it just ends up being that you only need him with one pass catcher.
Yeah, exactly. So I like to play. I like it at captain. What do you think of? So one of my one of the places that I work is I do the expert survey for Roto Grinders, and I really struggle with this one when we got to the questions, like the more like long form answers, where it's like, how do you want to build to get different for large field tournaments, and what is your favorite game script to build for? And some slates that's really easy for me. This one I really struggled with what to do because it sort of feels like, I don't know, the field is going to play a lot of the Cowboys, but they're also going to play a lot of Malik Neighbors, and I don't know, it kind of feels like the field isn't too off from what I want to do, so that makes it really tough for me to really prioritize one way of building. But I think what I ultimately wrote up, one way I like to build is full Giants onslaught with Daniel Jones at captain, include Malik Neighbors, but then also like Wan'Dale Robinson and Theo Johnson, or like, some off the wall play that I think you can see the upside case for sure. But doing like a full stack with Daniel Jones at captain, and looking at like ETR's data I was looking at earlier, they do a mix of like, this is what we expect to be the most common builds: 5-1 Cowboys, 4-2 Cowboys, whatever like that, and the lowest owned build that they're anticipating is 5-1 Giant stack, which to me is like, well, that should be the lowest owned build, but also I sort of have interest in it. I don't know. What do you think of a full on onslaught with Daniel Jones at captain?
Yeah, we're on the same page. I actually built, before the show, I just went ahead and went through my process just to see, like, where I'd be at if the slate started right now. And so I was just, while you were talking, I was looking through my Daniel Jones captain lineups, and he'd be in 18% of my lineups at captain right now. But what we were just saying about, like, single stacking partner and all that isn't what I'm getting to. I'm getting to what you were just talking about. 89% of my Daniel Jones captain lineups have Neighbors. 89% have Robinson. Actually, a lot of them have the Giants defense for whatever reason. But yeah, I have a lot of like Jones, Robinson, Neighbors, and then like one other guy from the Giants. But I also have a few where it's just Giants onslaughts, like Jones, Neighbors, Robinson, Giants defense, Slayton.
Yeah.
Cowboy.
Yep. And that honestly seems like it'll be pretty unique, and they don't even need, it doesn't even really need to be a blowout for that to work out, because the Cowboys are pretty expensive. And I think they can just put up a lot of points, like PPR points. So I think that you could get to a 5-1 Giants onslaught being in the winning lineup, even in like a back and forth kind of game. I don't know. I think just based on the salaries, do you think that's right?
I do also think, just going back to getting to the Giants with Daniel Jones, that's something that I don't like doing on full slates, because I think at like the upper end of your range of outcomes, they kind of cap each other. Like if the defense scores a touchdown, you're taking a possession away from the quarterback. And if they're not giving up points, the quarterback's probably not playing in the fourth quarter. So like on bigger slates, I prefer having defenses that aren't paired with my quarterback. But on a showdown slate, I think it actually can make some sense, because you don't need that 90th percentile outcome from everybody in your lineup to win, since there's limited options. And if the Giants defense does play well, in the sense that like they create turnovers and they're just consistently giving Daniel Jones a short field, that does benefit Daniel Jones also.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point. It's a little bit of a different dynamic, because you don't necessarily need the defense to be scoring the touchdowns themselves. Like you say, They could create the turnover, and then the short field. Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely viable on a showdown slate. Dak Prescott, you kind of said that you think he's under-owned in the captain spot, over-owned in the flex, if I'm remembering correctly. How are you generally pairing up Dak Prescott? Clearly not the same kind of rushing upside as Daniel Jones.
Yeah, Dak would be my highest owned captain right now at like 24%. And obviously you want to be pairing him with pass catchers. CeeDee Lamb, clearly the priority there in my Dak captain lineups. So not as concentrated, which I guess is to be expected, as the Giants, but 67% of those lineups have Ferguson, 67% have Lamb, and then kind of spreading it out with 40% Tolbert, 33% Cooks, some Dowdle and Zeke in there. So still, obviously stacking a lot with Dak, just a little bit more spread out than with the Giants, because while Lamb is going to dominate targets, or typically, is going to dominate targets, you do have more options, I think, on Dallas.
Yeah, I think you do too. Ferguson at 7,000. We'll talk about all the options, I guess, as we get to the other positions. But I think that makes sense. And yeah, for me, Dak does not run enough that I would want to run him naked ever. I think I always want at least one stacking partner, preferably multiple when you have Dak in the captain. So not quite the same rushing as Daniel Jones, stacking them up a little bit differently there. Before we move on to running backs, Adam, I see this comment from Big Russ says, flannel gang, and I gotta ask, are you wearing a flannel? I didn't even notice it. That looks like it might be a flannel shirt.
I don't know how flannel is actually defined, but I would consider it one.
Okay, yeah, so I do know, because of a TikTok I saw. I know how flannel is defined. This is an actual flannel being the material, and then there's buffalo plaid is like the pattern. Right. I don't really distinguish all that much. I don't care that much, but looks like it might be a real flannel. All right, we'll move on, talk about some running backs here. Also a good time to tell you, if you have not already subscribed to the channel, would appreciate trying to get to 3,000 subscribers is the short-term goal. Would like to get to 5,000 by the end of the NFL season. So setting my sights pretty high for the season in trying to grow this channel. You can see the banner at the bottom to see where we're at. But also, we are here with Adam from Endgame Syndicate. We're not streaming to Endgame Syndicate this morning. Sometimes we do. If you're not already subscribed to the Endgame Syndicate, you can find the link in the description of this video to the Endgame Syndicate YouTube. Also, Adam's Dub Club is there. A lot of good resources that you should check out. Adam, any other notes there?
No, that nailed it. Davis hijacked my channel again today. So if you wanted to multitask, you could watch Davis Maddock and Nerdy and Brick do Battle Royale drafts on the Endgame channel right now.
Just wait till this one's over, and then go check out the Endgame channel. You got the link right in the description. I should have. I bet there's a way for it to like push people there. I don't know how to do YouTube well enough, but I'm sure I could like push people to that channel after they're done here. But yeah, also check out the Endgame Syndicate channel, and of course Adam's Dub Club for NFL, which I know he's been working hard on. Okay. Running backs are up here. And again, just the same page. Don't even need to change a page. Just going to click running back and it goes right there. It's a beautiful thing. Devin Singletary, 8,200 projects much better than any other running back on the slate. The Cowboys have been terrible against the run so far this year, allowing like 4.7 yards per carry. Seems like a really good spot for Singletary. Adam, how much Singletary are you getting to?
Not a lot. I have him right now going really over-owned, particularly at flex. Have him projected for like 40% ownership, have him showing up optimal like 30% of the time. So still, obviously, that's a high probability play if you're going to be an optimal flex 30% of the time. But I do have him right now as the most over-owned flex. I have 20% of him at flex. If the slate started right now, I'd have 8% at captain. So that's shaking out, the way that I think I would want it to based on the data that I'm using. Obviously, if you disagree with me and you like Singletary more, the workload for him has been great. But I think it's a combination too, probably of like Daniel Jones looking like such a under-owned captain play to me that, pushing him in the captain is going to take away some of my Singletary at flex too, because it's going to end up prioritizing the pass catchers more from the Giants. So I think Singletary is fine, but I do right now expect to be below the field on him, particularly at flex.
Yeah, let me look at where the numbers are. We have in the flex Singletary coming in at 35.5% ownership, and then at captain Singletary at 9.5% ownership. Yeah, I don't see that doesn't immediately stand out to me as too much or too little on Singletary. But your sims are telling you that it's a little bit high. I trust that. That seems like a number that I wouldn't be shocked if that feels a little high. Cowboys given up the most fantasy points per game to running backs so far this year on DraftKings. So it feels like a good spot, but also like I think that their individual defenders are pretty good. So I'm not totally convinced the Cowboys defense is as bad as they have been so far. I don't know. It's a tough read for me because I think everybody wants to play Singletary as you're seeing with the ownership. Like, oh god, yeah, the Cowboys have been so bad against the run. Singletary gets all of the run on the Giants, 42 of 53 running back carries, 10 targets on the year, like pretty good workload for Devin Singletary. So I kind of understand why people want to go there. I don't know. I have I struggle to get away from like exactly where the ownership is on Singletary. This is one of those slates for me where it's just like things aren't standing out to me as much of like this is obviously like the field is getting this wrong. I can see how this could go a totally different way than things are going. But you're seeing less Singletary in your sims than this like 50% ish ownership that we have going to the field, or 45%.
Yeah, and to your point, like I don't think he's a bad player or anything. I like he's going to dominate touches out of the backfield. Tracy had a little bit bigger role last week. He had a like 15% rush share. Singletary was at 50. Daniel Jones was at 25. So, we saw the massive workload in week 2 from Singletary where he got 73% of the rushes. Eric Gray didn't get any. Tracy was barely involved. He went back to 50% last week. Jones got 25%. So 75% between Singletary and Jones, and then 25% to the combination of everybody else. So still, dominating touches for the most part. But it's not a big deal, but like, we have 3 games now where, week 1, if I remember correctly, was just a really shitty game script for Singletary. But then, you saw him dominate touches in a good game script in week 2. Week 3, he went back to kind of like a normal workload. So clearly the number 1 running back here, but also I think there's the potential for him to have that, just clear bell cow game, but I don't think it's going to be the norm either.
Yeah, no, pretty promising for Tyrone Tracy the last game, much more involved in that game than we have seen in the past. Yeah, you might be right. Like maybe we see Singletary's role dissipate a little bit from where it has been. Still not a bad role for Singletary. Obviously, last week, I don't know. Maybe they just have. This could be the pie getting bigger for the last week because he still saw just as many rushing attempts as his season high with 16. Still saw 4 targets, just one fewer than his most. So I don't know if it's him losing a role or just like they ran more. So then Tyrone Tracy, rather than giving more to Devin Singletary, they gave some of the bigger pie to Tyrone Tracy. It'll be interesting to see how things go there.
And I don't really think like I don't think Tracy's taking anything from Singletary, really. It's more so just like still trying to figure out exactly what is the normal Singletary role. Is it
Yeah.
getting every single touch out of the backfield that isn't Daniel Jones? Or is it like a normal running back one workload? I don't think this is anywhere close. I'm not saying it's anywhere close to like turning into a timeshare with Tracy, but it's just, exactly how much of the workload does he get? And I think it's more likely that Tracy is like a change of pace back that gives him a breather than that Tracy just spends the entire game on the sideline like he did week 2.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's hard to know exactly where the roles are. Also, like this would be sort of bearish for his upside if they do. Like as soon as it gets to, if they don't want to give him more than 16-ish carries, like obviously that's not the. I'm guessing that's not the exact number, but like if they do think, okay, once they get to a certain point, we're just going to work in other running backs as opposed to Alvin Kamara getting 34 touches or whatever it was last week. Like we see other running backs like, okay, if we're going to run the ball more, we're just going to get all of our running backs more involved. If that's not their thought, if they're thinking, if we're going to run more, we'll get the other running backs involved. That does kind of limit the upside there on Singletary. Yeah, it's hard to. So you think he's going a little bit over owned? I think that is valid. Like it really hard to get much of a read on Singletary. The ownership is close to fair to me, but could see that being the case. Let's work through New York. So we have Tyrone Tracy, as we have mentioned, a little bit more involved last week than he has been in the past. Former college wide receiver. I'm sort of hopeful that maybe he takes on more of a receiving back role. Still only projects for 4 fantasy points here on the Fantasy Points website. Salary of $2,800 for Tyrone Tracy. Actually, I want to compare that now to where do we have him in Roto-Runners? I'm curious what their projection is for Tracy, because this is one that it's, to me, there's a lot of input volatility here. We really don't know how to project Tyrone Tracy. Okay, 4.35. So not all that different in terms of projection. How much interest do you have in Tyrone Tracy today?
A little bit, nothing too crazy. I do, like I was saying, I expect him to have a role, which he basically didn't week 2, but I think it makes sense going forward that you would expect him to. He looked good in the preseason, got banged up a little bit towards the end, but I think he has enough of a role where he's fine as like, the last guy in value piece. I have 14% of him at flex right now. I assume I don't have him at captain. Yeah, I have 14% of him at flex right now. So I'm getting some, obviously not a piece that I'm really building around. He's projected for like 7% ownership. So I do think he's going a little bit under owned. And that is, also, I guess, a way where if, like I was saying, I don't think Singletary is a bad play. I don't dislike him, but if that happens to be a spot where I am, half the field or so, why not be mixing in more Tracy? Since one of the easiest ways for a chalk Singletary to bust is that either he gets hurt or Tracy just, for whatever reason, steals a touchdown or something.
Yeah, that's interesting, playing the leverage game a little bit there as well. Just looking at could Tyrone Tracy be more involved in a game where they're playing from behind? Just looking at the 11 routes run to Singletary. Sorry, that's for one game. So total of 26 routes run for Tyrone Tracy. Singletary doesn't really lap him there. It looks like 47 routes run for Singletary. So like relative to their other involvement, Tyrone Tracy taking on a bigger chunk of the receiving game work, more involved as a receiver. So I wonder if there's, do you see that at all in your sims? Is that something you can check? Like, do you think your sims put Tracy in there more in games where they expect the Giants to be playing from behind, so maybe they need to use their pass catching back a little bit more? I don't know if he's established himself as being that role, but it kind of looks like it maybe is going that way.
It could be. I mean, so like last week, they actually both saw an uptick in routes run. Singletary ran routes 44% of dropbacks. Tracy ran 28%, which was a season high for both, more so for Tracy than for Singletary. Singletary, 11% target share last week. Tracy was 6%. So like so far, I think they're just both being used in the passing game. But like logically what you're saying makes sense because, we still are only 3 games into the season. Tracy didn't have any real role in the first couple of weeks. So we don't know exactly how they're going to use them, but it does make sense where, you could get a game script where they just lean heavier on Tracy as a pass catching back if they're playing from behind.
Yeah.
Which is another reason I think that like I like him relatively in tournaments at low ownership because there is input volatility there where again, we can guess what the most likely case is, and it's that he's just the backup to Singletary, but we haven't really seen like maybe he just has a bigger pass catching role going forward than we're expecting.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with a rookie, like we've seen rookies go from like zero usage to a ton in 1 week to the next. So that
it's
is
just like a
definitely
prime spot because he's not getting much ownership. It's just a prime spot to just be like, okay, well, what if my best guess at what he does is wrong because I'm not very confident in it anyway, and
right.
like, how can I make money if I'm wrong?
Yep. I will say he's coming in a little bit higher owned in the Roto Grinders projections. They have him about 12% projected ownership
That's more in
in the
line with where I think
flex.
it should be, I think.
Yeah, so that's at that number, it's like, okay, that's kind of fair, as opposed to you're seeing 7% elsewhere. It'll be interesting to see where he actually comes in. Any other running backs on the Giants that you're interested in playing?
No.
Yeah, me neither. Don't really want to go into Eric Gray. Didn't really have much involvement in week 3 at all. 3 total snaps in that game. Had 1 carry, ran 2 routes. Just not enough.
If I were playing 50 lineups right now, I would have 1 Eric Gray lineup.
Okay, that seems reasonable. So he gets into your player pool right in line with, I think, projected ownership there. Probably, I actually have not looked at it. Project for 2% ownership. So yeah, that's right in line with the projected ownership for Eric Gray. Seems about right. Oh, something went wrong. Let me refresh that. But let's talk about the Cowboys receivers and running backs. All starts with Rico Dowdle. 6,400 projects for 11 fantasy points. Mike McCarthy said multiple times this past week, Adam, that they need to run the ball more. We just need more carries. Keep saying it. Said it multiple times this past week. So they want to run the ball more, they say. Seemed like maybe we were seeing Rico Dowdle used a little bit more last week. I'm not sure if that will hold based on some other quotes. I don't know. How are you feeling about Rico Dowdle at 6,400 at presumably a good amount of ownership? Actually, let me pull that up.
Yeah, I mean, I have him projected for like 26% flex ownership, about 4% captain, so like 30% overall. And that's pretty much exactly where I think he should be. 25% chance of being an optimal flex for me, 5% chance of being the optimal captain. So I don't really see, at like a player level, I don't really see any edge one way or the other. I would be coming in a little bit below the field on him personally. Like I have 16% if the slate started right now at flex, but that's and none at captain. But that's just more from like a lineup standpoint of he just happens to be in fewer lineups for me than the field. He's not somebody that's standing out as going particularly over or under owned. I do think, like you said, even though I don't buy a ton into coach speak because like they can just do it if they want to do it. Although I guess they were playing from behind for a lot of last game, but I do, it is nice that we saw 50% of Dallas's rushing share last week go to Dowdle. Week 1 and 2, he was at 32 and 33%. Zeke dropped to 19% last week. So I don't necessarily know that this is sticky. I don't know that it's gonna there's a good chance I think that it kind of just varies week by week based on who's doing well, what they see, what they, who happens to be on the field when Dallas is moving the ball. But it's certainly not a negative for Dowdle that he got a lot more carries than Zeke last week.
Yeah, it's hard to read because everybody watching is like, oh yeah, Zeke is washed. They finally realize that Zeke is washed. They're going to use Dowdle more. And I think some of us are sort of wish casting. Like I've been sort of hoping they would give Dowdle more run. And then we see it. And so I think the natural, the wish casters are like, all right, let's just latch on to that. No, it's Dowdle's backfield now. The quote that I'm referring to, and this is in the Coach Speak Index Discord, says about, so Mike McCarthy on September 24th, 2 days ago, said, we need more rushing attempts, and then also said Ezekiel Elliott only getting 15 snaps was just a product of the type of game we were in. We were behind and talking about no huddles and 2-minute offense in the middle of the third quarter. So sort of downplayed the lack of touches for Zeke in that game. And then he also said, I think he's been solid. He hasn't been given a lot of looks. It's hard to be critical of anybody when he's not having opportunities with the ball in his hand. So not totally writing off Zeke in the way that maybe we're hoping for, of just like, yeah, Dowdle has, done great. He's taken over. I don't know. It seems like they're not quite ready. Of course, then you also have the Jerry Jones factor, which I never know how real that is. The like Jerry Jones talking to the coaches, like, this is what I want you to do.
Right.
There's that narrative. I have no idea if there's any truth to it, but he definitely loves Zeke. So I don't know. There's some possibility that Zeke is going to just go back and have that kind of split backfield role.
My best guess is that it's still a split backfield. Like, obviously seeing Dowdle get more last week it can't be a negative for Dowdle, but I still think the most likely outcome is just that this varies week to week, and you have plenty of weeks where they're split. One thing that's interesting to me, and it was actually a reason that I was drafting a decent amount of Zeke in best ball, and it hasn't really come out, is I felt like it was going like really not talked about in the offseason that he suddenly became a pass catching back last year and hasn't been so far this year, but like that is something that kind of stood out to me where, he ran routes on 14% of dropbacks last week. Dowdle was at 29%. They're not using him in that role that he showed he can very clearly handle last year, at least so far.
I kind of thought the same thing, and I've stacked up Zeke. My camera went out. I'll get that fixed. I'm still here though. I've stacked up like Dak and Zeke in lineups because I thought like, oh yeah, he was such a good pass catcher. It would make sense for them to use him in that role. And yeah, you're right. Just we have not really seen it this year for some reason, but certainly capable of being a good pass catching back. Maybe at some point that comes back into play. They use him a little bit more in that role, but yeah, I guess it's as somebody who drafted a ton of Rico Dowdle in best ball, it's at least promising that it has not been the clear Zeke show. Like there was part of me that was worried that it was just going to be like Zeke is going to be the starting runner. There were actually parts of the offseason where the coaches or beat reporters, not the coaches, beat reporters were saying, looks like it's going to be Zeke competing with Royce Freeman, and like Rico Dowdle and Deuce Vaughn will fight for making the roster. It was a beat report that came out at one point pretty clearly that was not the case. Seems like Rico Dowdle probably the favorite at this point, but yeah, really hard to know what to make of this backfield right now. But Zeke's ownership is coming in. Honestly, I think the last I saw it looked pretty fair, but let me go find that again. Yeah, 16.5%. That feels a little bit high to me. How do you feel about 16.5% flex ownership?
I think compared to, so it's interesting to me because, well, for one, I haven't projected a lot higher. So I have him with like the same ownership as Dowdle. And
Okay.
if that happens, then I think I would just rather go to more Dowdle. But I also think that might just like end up being wrong. So I think it's a really interesting spot to kind of think about and try and pay attention to because, again, like I said, I'm getting 16% Dowdle, so I'm under the field. I'm only getting 6% Zeke at flex, so I'm way under the field, but that's with them projected for the same ownership. If you turn that into like 30% Dowdle and 20% Zeke, or 35% Dowdle and 25 or 15% Zeke, whatever, then Zeke becomes really, really interesting to me because it goes back to what you were just saying, where if all of the projection sites and everybody that wants Rico Dowdle to be a thing are just going to decide that now Rico Dowdle is a thing, and you can play Zeke at the exact same or basically the same salary with the same exact range of outcomes, it becomes really, really interesting. So where ownership actually ends up here, I think, is going to play a really big role in how I handle this. I do have 8% Zeke at captain right now, which I think is interesting. Doubt he's going to get much ownership there. I don't have any Dowdle at captain, so I don't know. That kind of stands out to me as just something that's weird right now. But he's projected. I have him projected for like 2% captain ownership, Dowdle for like 4%. So that kind of reinforces, I think, what I was just saying, where like at captain, where I have Dowdle projected for twice the ownership of Zeke, I'm actually playing Zeke more than the field. At flex right now, where I have the ownership projected the same, I'm not playing a lot of either of them, but I'm playing more Dowdle. So how that ownership shakes out is going to end up, I think, really determining where I go, because I think the best way to approach this is to just not trick yourself into thinking that you have any idea what the Cowboys are going to do tonight as far as their running back share goes, especially if you're quote unquote, like you're confident, which again, I just don't think you should be, but you're confident that they're going to do the same thing that like the whole industry is confident they're going to do. There's not even an edge to like guessing right there. And really all you're doing is guessing.
This feels like a slate. I mean, it's always true, regardless of the slate, that like if you knew actual ownership while building, you would have a massive edge. But I feel like that's even more true on this slate because I have no idea how ownership is going to shake out.
Yeah.
If I knew that ownership was going to shake out where Dowdle is going to be twice the ownership, 3 times the ownership of Zeke, then I would probably lean into Zeke. I'm not confident that's the case. It's also like Zeke is still a name brand. I think people came into the year with the expectation that it would be a split backfield. So I don't know if people are going to hold on to that, or if it is going to be like people just grab onto the like, oh, it's Dowdle's backfield now. I don't know.
I think it's going to be Dowdle. Like I'm going to end up adjusting this because the one big change that I had like manually made this morning was that I thought Wando Robinson was being really under projected ownership wise. So I already changed that before I ran all my stuff, but I didn't catch the Zeke versus Dowdle thing. Dowdle's just being projected higher than Zeke at the same price. And from a narrative standpoint, people want to play Dowdle. I don't really know how they end up being the same ownership.
Yeah, no, that's probably right that we do see Dowdle significantly more. Still, even at 16.5 for Zeke, it's hard for me to really want to prioritize him at that number. I think 16.5 would still be a fade for me. If we saw like single digit ownership, I would get there more. I don't know. I'm still kind of adjusting what I
I would
want to
like
do.
him at like 16.
You think so?
He showed up as optimal for me 19 to 20% of the time at flex. And I'm probably a little bit low on his projection too, just with the initial stuff I ran this morning. Like I'm probably going to end up with a higher median projection on Zeke than I have right now and a lower ownership projection than I have right now. So yeah, like if he's 15, 16%, I like it, especially assuming that if he's 15, 16%, it pushes Dowdle's ownership up also.
Good point. Yeah, maybe I need to adjust a little bit there. I think I'm sticking to my the reason I say I'm hesitant is because that is what I've written so far, and now I'm doubting myself about whether I do need to be getting into more Zeke. Because the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, he could just have more usage. Like the coaches came out and said it was a product of the game environment, so maybe it is still a split backfield. The
Also,
Giants,
like even if Dowdle does get most of the touches, who's getting the touches inside the 10?
right? Good point. It very like it has always been Zeke inside the 10. The other running back to consider there. So now that we're talking about inside the 10 touches is Hunter Lupke, the fullback, got a little bit of run last week in the passing game. So he's 800, only projects for 2 fantasy points. I'll bring up the bell cow report here though. Hunter Lupke, as you can see here in week 3, ran 14 routes. So previous weeks 4 and 7 had more than both of weeks 1 and 2 combined. 3 targets in the game. Still doesn't have a carry on the year. Part of me is like, well, it would make sense if Zeke is not doing well, why not just give the fullback those carries inside the 10? Again, they have not done that yet. But do you have any interest in Hunter Lupke with his 3 targets, 14 routes run last week, not getting a ton of ownership?
I have way more interest than I realized. He's in 22% of my lineups right now.
Oh, damn. Yeah.
At $800. He's interesting to me. I mean, one, I think it's just a way to, in massive field tournaments, try and differentiate. He's not somebody that I'd really be expecting to play in small field stuff, I don't think, because he's obviously not very likely to come through. But with him not projected for any ownership and at $800, he's actually interesting. I thought he was kind of interesting, not that it was actionable because they weren't on a showdown slate, but the week that Ferguson was out, they were talking about how he's somebody they really like. He's kind of like a Swiss Army knife type guy that can move him around. He can play tight end. He can play fullback and be involved in the passing game and just do a lot of different stuff. So we didn't really see that the week that Ferguson was out. But, last week you did see him actually running routes. Like you said, he ran routes 20% of the time week 1. That's the week that Ferguson initially got hurt. Only 9% the week without Ferguson, 25.5% last week. That's the same as Schoonmaker. He ran more routes than Jalen Brooks last week. So more routes than Turpin. So like he's involved enough. And I think just based on what, they kind of said about the way that they want to use him, I don't think it was necessary. I think his route running and, route participation and targets and everything will certainly fluctuate aggressively week to week. But I do think he's somebody that the Cowboys like actively want to be mildly involved in their offense. And at $800 and no ownership, that's interesting.
He's almost exactly to me like a Kyle Juszczyk, like feels exactly the same. It's like people love slamming Kyle Juszczyk on Showdown. Lupke not projected for any ownership here, of course.
But it's like Kyle Juszczyk before people realized that he was just consistently going to get the ball 3 times a game.
Right.
Like you can't. I don't remember what he was on the recent San Francisco slate, but he's like $2,700 now, right?
Yeah. He's definitely more expensive than Lupke is.
Right.
And he gets a little bit of ownership. So yeah, I'm kind of interested there. I don't know, 22%. That is that would be quite a stand if you end up with 22%. I also think this ownership number probably a little bit light because you can see the projection is light here. So I imagine that will be adjusted at some point throughout the day, and the ownership will come up as well. But probably going to be
and like that's an example where. So I'm going back right now to see exactly what I simmed against, but like. He was in like the field that I was simming against, Lupke was in there like 4% of the time, and I got 22%. So that is actually a little bit of a buffer. Like since he's only projected for about 2% right now, I still had him showing up more often than that in the field that I was playing against. But that is one of those spots where if you are relying on Sims tools, you do want to be paying attention to, like, if somebody is literally in 1% of the field lineups that you're playing, that you're simming against, it's going to give you a much different output than if they were even in 5%. So this is somebody where, maybe if by lock I haven't projected for like 6%, I get a little bit less, but I do like that even at 4 to 5%, he's showing up as a really good play for me.
Right, and as you said, projected for even less ownership around the industry. Pretty interesting there. We haven't seen the goal line stuff yet. I'm sort of wish casting that like it would make sense for them to use Hunter Luepke at the goal line, because he is just a big dude. Of course, but ideally I would love it for it to be Dowdle, because I have so much Dowdle in best ball. But I think for a showdown slate, wish casting the goal line stuff going to Luepke, I think could make some sense there. Couple comments on Zeke here. Bridgeline says Zeke sucks. Agreed. Ted Lemoyne, yeah, Dowdle has not been great either. Ted says, how long has it been since you needed Zeke in a lineup to win? It has been last year. I think there was some just last year on the Patriots. He had some like really big
5+ passes a game last year.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Benny brings that up. Yeah, but really, what comes down to what Tim says. Hey, you got to get weird if you want to make money. Like it's just a matter of this is a showdown slate. Probably not playing Zeke on a main slate unless he's like mid-priced, but on a showdown slate, I think he could make some sense if he comes in at low ownership.
Holy shit, this is a bad lineup, but like I also like it.
You do.
I was just scrolling through my Hunter Luepke lineups. I have one that has him and Jalen Hyatt.
Damn. Okay. I mean, Darius Slayton being questionable. I guess we'll talk about receivers next. But yeah, that's a lot of low ownership there on two players. Don't have a ton of those. Deuce Vaughn, the only one I'll bring him up for Tony Sprocket, who loved him all offseason in best ball. Deuce Vaughn projected for 1.2 fantasy points at 1,200. To me, I started writing up Deuce Vaughn until I saw the Hunter Luepke usage, and I was like, that to me just seems better. So I went with Hunter Luepke instead. Deuce Vaughn, the past 2 weeks has run 7 routes and has 3 targets over the course of the past 2 weeks. Also has 6 carries. So honestly, not all that dissimilar from Hunter Luepke. I think the ownership is higher though. What do we have? Oops, and give me a second. I think the ownership going to be somewhat higher on Deuce Vaughn. Probably still not a ton of ownership. Okay, here we go. Deuce Vaughn. Oh, damn. 15% projected ownership. Yeah, to me, that's just like...
I've meant
4. 4 seems more reasonable to me. I'd be surprised if he gets up that high. But people love their Deuce Vaughn. Okay, I am seeing more than 4, but definitely less than 15 in other places for Deuce Vaughn. Looking at single digits, but high single digits other places. I don't know. If the ownership is... Even if it is, say... 7-8% on Deuce Vaughn, I would just prefer to go to unowned Hunter Luepke. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, it's kind of, I think they have very similar roles. The big difference is that people know who Deuce Vaughn is.
Yeah.
And so he's just going to show up more. They're going to feel more confident, but like you shouldn't really feel confident in either guy. One of them is going to get less ownership. One of them is less salary. One of them is more likely to be used around the goal line. Not that either of them is likely, but like I'll take the fullback / tight end Taysom Hill guy over the guy that's smaller than me.
Yeah, exactly. Just like he's definitely the more likely goal line guy. Yeah, I think 15% is definitely high. I'm guessing that will come down throughout the day.
You're probably right that it settles like 7-8%.
Yeah, that feels, because people, as you say, people do know the name. He is sort of like a speedy little guy that people are like, oh, that'd be fun. He could break one off. But to me, like, yeah, I'll just take the guy who's more involved in the passing game. So just like more likely to rack up PPR points. He's actually cheaper. He has the could have the goal line role. Definitely more likely to get the goal line role. And he's coming in at lower ownership. So, don't usually make it a habit on showdown sites of being like clearly like compare this guy to this guy. It's like, you can make a case for anybody, but like since they're both Dallas running backs and there's a big discrepancy in ownership, just like in a vacuum, I think Luepke is the better play. And then you factor in ownership and it becomes a much better play.
It's kind of just like the smaller version of Zeke and Dowdle, right? Like if you guarantee me that
Yep.
Vaughn is like 8% owned and Lupke's like 2 or 3, I absolutely want Lupke. If they're the same ownership, then I probably still prefer Lupke just because he's cheaper.
Yeah.
But if he were more popular, I would very easily just switch to Deuce Vaughn because these guys are both going to play small roles, but probably both have a role. And it really just comes down to who converts on their couple of targets or whatever, who happens to fall into the end zone. So like there's so much volatility in between these two guys that you shouldn't have confidence that you can pick the one that's going to do well. But if I'm going to be able to get, when you have two guys that are the same as far as their range of outcomes is like 0 to two catches and a touchdown, I just want the cheaper, lower owned one if that's an option.
Yep, exactly. Same page on the running backs. Did we have any other? I don't know if there's any other running backs in play for me. Anybody else you caught that I didn't see here?
No, I think that's all the running backs that I know their names.
Yeah, me too. All right, we will move on. Talk about wide receivers. Fantasy Points has Malik Neighbors projected higher than CeeDee Lamb, higher than any other wide receiver on the slate. I was sort of shocked to see this. It is different around the industry. I do think it's defensible, just given the usage we've seen from Malik Neighbors so far. Most places do have CeeDee Lamb projected higher, but let's talk about the Giants start. So RotoRennis has Malik Neighbors projected for 41% flex ownership. At captain, they have Neighbors at 11, a little bit over 11% ownership. I like those numbers on Neighbors. I think I probably come in overweight to the field on those numbers. How do you feel about Neighbors?
I'm over on both of them right now. I have 20% Neighbors captain. He's my second highest owned captain behind Dak. I have 54% at flex. He's my second highest owned flex behind Lamb. So yeah, I'm over both of those numbers and I feel good about it. I mean, yeah, the Cowboys are going to throw the best coverage at him that they can, but it is a banged up secondary overall. And he's just dominating targets and so good at converting on those targets that it's really difficult, I think, to want to get away from him.
Yep, agreed. On September 15th, again, going back to the Coach Speak Index Discord, Dable was asked on whether he's okay with 18 targets for Malik Neighbors. His response was, yeah, it's like totally fine. Just feed him the ball. On 923, I have a lot of confidence in Malik Neighbors. I think we target him a fair amount, but I think he's earned that. He's earned the right to have those opportunities. Like they're just totally fine with just slamming it, giving the ball to Neighbors over and over again. And I have, let's see, what are the splits in terms of what's his fewest targets in the game? Did he actually have an 18 target game?
He got a 17% target share.
Oh, that's right. So it was just the 1 week, but still 7 targets in his lowest game. And that was week 1, his first ever NFL game. It's been 12 and 18, or in the opposite, or 18 and 12 in the 2 weeks since then. Yeah. And then
the nice thing too, and I mentioned this after week 1, why I wasn't overly concerned about that is like, yeah, he has a higher average depth of target than Wan'Dale Robinson. But it's not like he's one of these guys where he's drawing targets, 20 yards downfield, right, and Daniel Jones has to convert on big plays for Neighbors to have a big game. Like he's running routes all over the field. They're getting him the ball in space short. Then they're taking shots deep. Like he's not like a one-trick pony where if they're getting pressure on Jones and he can't get it downfield, Neighbors is cooked. Like he's going to be fine regardless.
Yep. And just to show you the full context of the NFL target share in the NFL, Neighbors is, I guess Cup is out of him here, 35.2% target share. Maybe I had a filter on, but second in the NFL in target share, route percentage, also third in the NFL. Just massive numbers for Malik Neighbors so far this year.
He's first in actual targets, right?
Oh, you're right. Yeah, I think maybe that was the number I was looking at. Yeah, 37 targets on the year for Malik Neighbors. First 3 games of his entire NFL career. Pretty insane to have 37 targets this early. So in a pretty obviously great play, going to be targeted a ton. Cowboys have been somewhat exploitable so far this year. I think what was the number here? Let me pull that up. They've given up the 6th most DraftKings fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. Seems like it should be a pretty good spot here for Malik Neighbors. Wan'Dale Robinson, though, also getting pretty significant work so far this year. This is, I think, I saw a stat that in terms of target share, if you just look at Wan'Dale Robinson and Malik Neighbors, their combined target share, which is 47%, is more than the top 3 receivers or pass catching options on like 23 NFL teams. Like they just have such a massive, so much of the target share goes to just those two. I think you said earlier that you think Wanda Robinson going a little bit under projected. How are you feeling about? Actually, let me show you the ownership that we have on Roto-Grinders. I know we like to look at different places around the industry. Wandale at 29% projected flex ownership feels pretty fair to me. I like that number. And then in the captain, 5%. So how do you feel about Wandale?
Yeah, so I ended up going even higher than that on his ownership projection because when I ran my stuff, he showed up as optimal in the flex like 35% of the time. And it just stood out as something where anybody using Sims and similar, projections to me is just going to end up slamming Robinson if industry ownership projections are in that 25 to 30% range. So I do think that's a spot where he probably ends up just coming in a little bit higher owned than is being projected. But even with that, like I ran my stuff with him projected at 35% ownership, he still showed up in the flex 46% of the time for me. So just looks like a really, really good play. Gets a lot of targets, obviously, second behind Neighbors. He runs relatively short routes. So you get at least in theory, a higher conversion rate on those routes. And again, you have a banged up Dallas secondary. So they're going to do whatever they can to take away Neighbors, and they can't really do a whole lot about Robinson at that point, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like Robinson quite a bit. I think I wrote in my expert survey that I think he's the player I'm going to be most overweight to the field on overall. Just seems like kind of a smash. The price tag isn't that high. The ownership is not getting that high. I think people hate to play Wandale Robinson, and I know I have this conversation with my friend Scott Barrett, CEO of Fantasy Points. He hates Wandale Robinson in fantasy in general. He's just like, he has no upside. Why would you ever play Wandale Robinson? He's just a PPR scam artist, whatever. And I'm like, I love that he's a PPR scam artist, brings up the floor so much, but then he could just score 2 touchdowns. Like the upside is, what if he just gets in the end zone? He hasn't done it a whole lot, but like clearly he has the ability to score touchdowns. He's had 11 targets in a game already this year. If he just converts those targets, yeah, he doesn't, his ADOT is really low, probably not going to have a ton of yards, but like, what if he just breaks one? If they just keep giving him the ball at some point, he clearly has the ability to break off a long reception. So yeah, I like him quite a bit.
I hate the no upside argument in a sport like NFL. Like it makes some sense in baseball where like you can either hit home runs and steal bases or generally you can't. It makes some sense in like basketball where if you have 3-star teammates and you're the 4th guy, they're not going to let you shoot enough to have a high ceiling. But like there's so much volatility and variance in football where you get a lot of points just because you happen to get tackled in the end zone. Like if you're getting thrown the ball, you have upside in DFS.
Yeah, that is generally my philosophy also. So we're both very into Wandale Robinson. Then it gets more interesting. So Darius Slayton is questionable with a thumb injury, projected for 4.2 fantasy points, 3,200 salary. Has not been super involved in the passing game, but he is running a ton of routes so far this year. Ton is, I guess, relative. 73.7% route participation, second on the team, actually ahead of Wandale Robinson in terms of routes run, just 10 targets on the year. I don't know. A thumb injury seems bad to me as a receiver, but he's questionable. He's not ruled out. I also like if he goes, I'm like, well, what if he's limited? But like, would he be limited if he goes? Would he be limited at all, or would he just play the full game? Because I want to play Jalen Hyatt. Like I want to just go to his low-owned teammate and like make a case for that. But right. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with Jalen Hyatt and Darius Slayton. But Slayton would be the the one who is at least out there so far. So I guess start with Slayton. How do you feel about him today?
Yeah, so I mean, right now I'm not playing a ton of either one. Slayton was also the one that I gave a haircut to his ownership projection. When I bumped up Robinson, I took some away from Slayton, but still only got to like 10% Slayton at flex. I got to 6% Hyatt at flex. If Slayton's in, I think obviously it's difficult to have confidence in either guy. They do still have the ability to outperform their salary just because, again, if they catch, they're both deep threats. They obviously, if they get behind the defense, especially, again, a defense that's missing corners, they can pretty easily pay off their salary with one catch, but still tough to trust either one. Slayton has been involved as far as running routes goes. He just hasn't been turning them into targets. 72% route participation last week, and that was with the injury that I think cost him at least some time on the field. 83% week 2, 69% week 1. So like he's been out there running routes. He just hasn't been drawing targets, but obviously that can change any game. Hyatt only running routes 12 to like 17% of the time through the first 3 weeks. So if they're both in, you prefer Slayton, but also like Hyatt's cheaper, and but you're gonna have more opportunities for Slayton if he's in. If he's out, then obviously Hyatt becomes a lot more interesting at $600 or whatever he is.
Yeah, I mean, Hyatt would become. I think interesting is the right way to describe it, because the ownership would obviously come up pretty significantly, and he's still a very boom bust option. So, like, I would love him again if we knew the actual ownership on in that scenario where Darius Slayton is out. If we knew the actual ownership on Jalen Hyatt, it would make all the difference in the world to me in how I play it, because extremely boom bust. So, like, if he was going to be 50% owned, that's an obvious fade for me. But if he's still going to be 14% owned, I would probably slam that with Jalen Hyatt. Pretty interesting. You look through just so far on the year, Jalen Hyatt's actually, that's not where I want to go. Here's where I want to go. Jalen Hyatt ADA on his 2 targets, so it is just 2 targets, but 31 is the average depth of target on those targets. He's just being targeted downfield so far, and that's kind of what he always has been. Like, he's just a deep, big play threat. So it's tough because I guess we'll know 90 minutes prior to lock whether Darius Slayton is playing. Would you give any kind of boost to Hyatt if Slayton is active, like because of maybe he re-aggravates the thumb? Like, of course, if he's never been targeted, how is he going to re-aggravate the thumb? I don't know. Would you give would you give any kind of boost to Jalen Hyatt for the possibility of a re-aggravation if we do have Darius Slayton active?
I don't think so. I think it's a reasonable thing to do, but also, and it also, I think, kind of depends on your process. Like, if you're using more Sims based stuff that is easily accounting for range of outcomes, I don't really think it's all that necessary, because you're still going to get, it's still going to be factoring in good Jalen Hyatt games. If you're using just like a straight optimizer where it's just running off median projections, then yeah, you might want to do something to account for a somewhat elevated, I don't know if elevated ceiling is the right word, but like the whatever percent chance that Slayton does re-aggravate his injury.
Elevated possibility of hitting the ceiling because maybe he has more opportunities. Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. And I guess even without being targeted, I guess they do a fair amount of like blocking and stuff. There are other ways to re-aggravate the thumb injury. So yeah, I think maybe a little bit of a boost there is interesting. I will be on later, Sean. I'll be going my usual time, 90 minutes prior to lock. Also love the second comment. Adam Scherer, your takes are starting to appeal to me.
Give it time, it'll stop.
I mostly ignore what Adam says, but yeah, I guess his takes are okay sometimes. No, Adam, one of the best in the industry for a long time, obviously. Any other, let's see. Yeah, I think that's all the Giants receivers for me. I do have some interest in Jalen. Actually, look at the ownership on Jalen Hyatt. Okay, I mean that's a captain. All right, so close to nothing at captain. In the flex, we have Jalen Hyatt at. I thought I just saw it. Here we go. 5% ownership seems about right to me. Like he's really just a zero floor, could have a big long touchdown and be great. Yeah.
He's like he's the most frustrating, like the type of guy that I hate the most in Showdown, where he's priced in a way where if like he can just get 0 because he doesn't catch his one deep ball, but if he does catch it, he's optimal.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like all comes down to, does he catch his 1 or 2 opportunities that he has? Does he make a big catch on that one? It is the most right. It's like the backup tight end, where it's just like, yeah, he's probably not going to play a lot, but like he's more likely to get opportunities in the red zone because he is a big tight end. Like he's a great end zone target. If he scores a touchdown, then he's probably going to be optimal. It's the exact same kind of thing, I think, with Hyatt.
Right. When I like Hyatt showed up flex optimal, like 4% of the time when I simmed it, but like realistically, it's either 0 or 100. Like,
yep,
depending on if he catches it.
Yep. Ultimately, I think that I would probably be slightly above weight because I am internally giving him the slight boost for maybe Slayton being somewhat limited, maybe more opportunities, more chances to hit that ceiling, but really just a slight boost for me there, where I think I like him better than the projected ownership, but maybe 10% I'll have of Hyatt. Still not going to be really jamming into lineups. All right. On to Cowboys receivers. CeeDee Lamb, most places he is the highest projected receiver on the slate. He is also 11,800, which makes it a little bit tough to play a ton of CD. 43% 8.5% projected ownership in the flex. At captain, we have CD at, I did that wrong. 17% projected ownership. So good amount of ownership for a very expensive CD Lamb. The Giants are missing 2 of their starting cornerbacks, so they've been kind of a middling defense in terms of fantasy points allowed to receivers, but with 2 starting cornerbacks out in this game, feels like a pretty good spot for Dallas. What are you doing with CD Lamb?
Yeah, I think Lamb looks good. He's my highest owned flex right now, 60%. Not getting a lot of them at captain, which is terrifying, but interesting. Like I have 20% Neighbors at captain. I have 24% Dak. I only have 4% Lamb right now. So using him a lot at flex, not using him a lot at captain. I have him going over owned at both. So it's not like a situation where I think he's just being played too much at captain and not enough at flex, but still clearly one of the highest projected guys on the slate. So even if I think he's over owned, I'm still just going to be able to find enough lineups that have him and then differentiate elsewhere that he's going to look good overall. But most of my Lamb exposure, at least right now, is at flex.
Yeah, I think it's the same for me. I think he's so expensive. He's more expensive than anybody else on the slate, so becomes sort of cost prohibitive.
I also have him projected as the highest owned captain right now. I don't know if you do.
Let me see. So RotoGrinders has him at, yeah, they do have him the highest owned at 17.3%. Seems fine-ish. But yeah, I think with the price, I probably end up mostly in the flex. The other Cowboys, it is I think there's just 2 other receivers, just Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert. The only other receivers that I'm considering. We have, I don't know, who do you prefer between Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert? This is where it gets more interesting with the Cowboys. We had Jalen Tolbert running routes on 82% of dropbacks last week, 5 targets in that game, 8 targets in week 2 on 83% rep participation. We have Brandon Cooks at in week 3, 82% rep participation, 6 targets. In week 2, just 2 targets, but 76% rep participation. Honestly, the roles seem pretty similar to me between the two. Let's take a look at the ownership. We have Tolbert at just 20% ownership. Cooks at 25. That's interesting to me because I kind of would have anticipated the opposite with Tolbert being cheaper. I feel like more people are more excited about him, but I could be totally wrong about that. I'll throw it to you. Let's hear your breakdown of Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert. How do you feel about these guys?
Yeah, so just rewind it to where we were talking about Zeke and Dowdle, and that's pretty much my answer. Is I really would like to know the actual ownership here because right now, lower ownership projection for Tolbert, which I think is what you said, than Cooks. Similar projections. They're playing very, very similar roles. Tolbert is cheaper. So if you give me 2 guys with the same role and the cheaper guy is also lower owned, I'm going to prefer that guy. But also there's just a chance that the ownership projections are wrong because the field isn't stupid and they're going to do that too. And instead of it being 25% Cooks and 13% Tolbert or whatever, it ends up being like 18% each, which isn't the end of the world. But I do think this is a spot where there's just some volatility in that ownership projection. But with the inputs I used, I got to 18% Tolbert, 10% Cooks, which is what I would expect given their projected ownership right now.
At the exact same ownership, who would you prefer? Like if they're both getting exactly 18% ownership or 20% ownership, whatever.
I mean, it would depend on the lineup, I guess, because like Cooks projects higher, but he's $1,000 more. So it depends like what you're sacrificing. Cooks showed up as optimal 18% of the time for me. Tolbert showed up 15%. So like if they were both 18%, I would probably just play them both like 15 or something, like somewhere around there, like around the field, similar to each other. But the way it's projected right now, where Cooks is getting like 1.5 times the ownership of Tolbert, I like the idea basically of just, and it's how it worked out for me, getting like 1.5 times as much Tolbert as Cooks.
Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm not totally. I kind of think Tolbert ends up higher owned. Maybe I'm wrong because Cooks is also like a household name. He's been in the NFL, been a like semi-star for a long time, whereas Tolbert is the up and coming.
Right. So like I think there's a tendency, and it may be right over a bigger sample. I don't know, but like when you think about the Cowboys passing game, I know for me and probably for most people, CeeDee Lamb's the clear number 1. Like in your head, CeeDee Lamb's the clear 1. Brandon Cooks is the 2. And then the 3 is one of Tolbert or Turpin or Brooks or whoever. When really it's been CeeDee Lamb is clearly the 1, and Tolbert and Cooks are very clearly just like 2/3, both of them.
Yeah, just looking at these numbers, like they are extremely close. Looking at the overall on the season, Cooks is ahead of Tolbert just barely in terms of route participation. Both have exactly 15 targets on the year. Both have ADOTs pretty far down the field. Cooks at 13.6, Tolbert at 15. So it's another spot where, yeah, I'm with you exactly. Like if I just knew the actual ownership, that would be affect how I play it pretty dramatically, because I don't think there's an actual big difference between the two.
Especially like if you look at their weekly targets, like weekly target shares too. So last week, 10% target share for Tolbert, 12% for Cooks. They were really close to each other, combined for around 22%. Week 2, 19% target share for Tolbert, 5 for Cooks. So combined for like 24%. Tolbert dominated between the two of them. Week 1, 22% for Cooks, 6 for Tolbert. So combined for like 27, 28%. Cooks dominated the target. So like they're just going for like 22 to 28% target share combined every week. And sometimes it's split down the middle. Sometimes it's one of them getting all of it.
Yeah, it's really tough to predict ahead of time. The only coach speak that I have on either of them, recent coach speak on September 19th, Mike McCarthy on Jalen Tolbert. He said Jalen Tolbert has a tremendous work ethic. Through his work and his diligence, you can see his confidence continue to increase. This guy doesn't miss an opportunity to get better. I want to see him build off what he did versus Seattle. So, kind of positive coach speak. I don't really think it sways me at all. Just a young player. The coach is hyping him up a little bit. But I lost my camera again. Maybe I'll just stick with my computer camera for now. I think, yeah, both. I want the lower owned of the two. I don't really feel that confident that I know who it's going to be, but I guess we'll check out ownership projections closer to lock on those two. Are you going to any Cavante Turpin, Jalen Brooks, any of the other tertiary receivers?
I can't tell. I have like 4% Jalen Brooks. I don't have any Turpin right now, so not too much.
Turpin last week he ran 9 routes and saw 3 targets, so more than I would expect for Turpin in general. Jalen Brooks in week 3, 11 routes, so a little bit more than Turpin. Also saw 3 targets. Both are. It's again like not expecting much from either of them. Maybe one of them scores a touchdown. I don't know. I currently don't really plan to play either of them in a 150 set. I probably would though. I guess we can take a look at ownership here.
Yeah, I mean, the problem too is salary, but also this is a spot where like, me saying I don't really have them, it also kind of depends on what you're doing with other value pieces. Like I already said, I'm playing I have 22% Lupke right now. If I'm playing him in that many lineups and I have like a little bit of Jalen Hyatt too, I don't really need, and I have a little bit of Vaughn, I don't really need to be taking that many shots at 4K Turpin or 2K Brooks. If you're not playing those cheaper guys, then yeah, you're going to just have more of a role available in your lineups for taking shots at random Cowboys receivers.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's just a matter of I'm prioritizing others over these cheap guys. They just don't have as big roles. And I think there are others with maybe better roles who are getting lesser ownership. So it's hard to prioritize them. All right, we'll move on to tight ends. And Jake Ferguson, 7,000 salary, projects for 12.4 fantasy points. Already missed a game this year, but does have the highest, actually has the highest target share on the Cowboys, ahead of CeeDee Lamb. Has obviously fewer targets overall, and you don't expect that to hold, but very solid role for Jake Ferguson this year. Same as last year. He's arguably their number 2 receiver. How do you feel about Jake Ferguson, 7,000?
Yeah, I like him quite a bit. I have 36% at flex right now, having projected for like 30% ownership. So I'm a little over the field there. I have like 4% at captain, so I'm a little under the field there. But overall, combined, just right around the field on Ferguson. Like you said, we were just talking about Tolbert and Cooks as, the wide receiver 2/3, but really it's kind of like the 3-4 when you have Ferguson out there along with Lamb. So, he's a tight end. We know obviously the tight ends have struggled all season long. For the most part, they suck and they're volatile, but Ferguson is a legitimate pass catcher. He's going to be targeted by Dak. He's a red zone threat. So I do like getting him. I think the field's pretty much got it correct.
Yeah, I like him. I think I probably end up overweight to the field. Just the 7,000 price tag I do really like on Ferguson. But yeah, this is the ownership. I think it was 30% yesterday. It's coming up a little bit closer to where I'd like it. So I don't really feel as good about taking a big stand there. 9% cap ownership. Both those numbers I'm pretty sure came up from what I was seeing yesterday. So I was planning on taking a bigger stand, and now it's like, okay, those seem more fair. Maybe I'll be slightly overweight in the flex, but hard to take much of a stand there. Those
I do like that he ran routes on 73% of dropbacks last week too. So it's not like they really eased him back in or anything like that.
Yeah,
he was involved right out of the gate.
Just ready to go. Saw 11 targets in that game too. Damn, didn't even. Yeah, it's very very solid.
Target share on the team.
Yeah, I mean he does on the full season.
Which was only 19.5%. They spread it out a lot, but still.
That was also, it is notable. Like CD was being like double covered the entire game, and they were just really shutting him down. So the Ravens kind of forced them to go elsewhere away from CD last game. I don't think the Giants are going to be capable of doing that while they're missing 2 starting cornerbacks. So it could just be a CD game, but obviously the field will be there on CD. Luke Schoonmaker last week, 25.5% route participation, saw a couple targets. I don't know how much interest do you have in Luke Schoonmaker? Is this just the typical backup tight end where it's like if he scores a touchdown, you'll want him. If he doesn't, you won't? Is there anything different you're seeing about Luke Schoonmaker?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I'm not getting to him, but again, like if you aren't going to play Loopkey at $800, or you're just going to play less than it appears I am, then Schoonmaker is going to start showing up at least a little bit. But it's basically to me like the same play as those guys where, somebody like Loopkey where you're hoping he gets in the end zone. He's not likely to be heavily involved overall, unless Ferguson were to get hurt or something. But he could, just easily catch a red zone target, and then you want him in your lineup. But again, I just have so much of Loopkey at $800 that it's costing me guys like Schoonmaker.
Yep, I think that's kind of where I'm at too. I'm not prioritizing Schoonmaker at the very least. I'm not getting to any Brevin span forward. Are you?
No.
The other side of the game, Theo Johnson. 2,400 hasn't really done much so far. I won't give you my take. I want to hear your thoughts on Theo Johnson.
I'm surprised I don't have more than I do. I only have 4% right now. That again might have to do with just getting to the cheaper guys and then not really needing him much. So if I were to lose those cheap guys, I assume I start getting some more. But I'm surprised. He's 2,400. He's been involved. He ran routes on 80% of dropbacks last week. That was more than anybody on the team other than Neighbors. He had an end zone target that shit.
Dude, is that your fire alarm? All right, I will continue while Adam is on mute because he has an alarm going. So yeah, Adam says that he's not getting to him a lot. It sounds like in his brain, Adam likes Theo Johnson more than his ownership would suggest. And if that's the case, then we are on the same page with Theo Johnson, because the 80% route participation last week in Adam, whenever you are capable, if the alarm stops going off, feel free to just come back in. But my take, or you can make faces at the camera. I don't know how you want to play this. My feeling is I like Theo Johnson quite a bit. The 80% route participation has not resulted in a ton of targets for Theo Johnson so far. As you see here, last week, 3 targets on those 80% route participation, 0 in week 2. He had 4 in week 1. So kind of all over the place. But we have Theo Johnson at just 2,400. The ownership I don't think is very high either. So even though we haven't seen it yet, I think that he's a pretty talented rookie tight end. He is like 6'6", so it would make sense for him to be a target in the red zone. He's already running out there quite a bit. I saw a little article. I read a little bit about how the coaches are basically saying like they're not concerned about his slow start so far. They're the development is, he's a rookie tight end. Dable, I know, did a whole spiel on how difficult it is to be a rookie tight end. Like it is hard to get the rookies going. But he seemed overall hopeful, I thought, on Theo Johnson. So I like it. I'm going to be taking shots there. I'm betting on the route participation and the team eventually wanting to lean into their big rookie tight end. Maybe just gets a touchdown there. Probably pays it off at 2,400. Maybe not quite, but I'm hoping that it gets a little bit more involved because I don't know how sustainable this 13 targets per game or 15 over the past 2 weeks for Malik Neighbors. I don't know if that is entirely sustainable. So I'm buying in on Theo Johnson. Looks like Adam is not ready to join us yet. Still has the alarm going off. Hopefully by the end of the show, because I want to hear what this alarm is about. Adam, if your building is on fire, feel free to go get out of the building as well. I will continue without.
I think it's done.
Oh, you do? Okay, good.
Was it it was a test, but it just kept going and wouldn't stop. But I think it's done now. So I didn't hear a word that you said. Okay. But what I was going to say is that I'm surprised I'm not getting more of him at 2,400 because he did run a ton of routes last week. I do know, just because I happened to see it, that he had an end zone target go off of his hands where he would just look very different if he had caught that from, what has he done to date standpoint. So from a workload standpoint, I think he's a pretty good play at 2,400. He's still not getting targets because, like we were saying before, they're just dominated by Neighbors and Robinson. But he's cheap. He's not that popular. He's projected for like 10% ownership. And I don't know. I think he's a pretty good play. But again, I'm just using cheaper guys, I guess, where if I were to stop using them by lock, or if you just don't want to play those guys, then Theo Johnson does start to pop up. Like, I think I would rather play Theo Johnson than the Cowboys 4th receivers. Yeah,
same page. Yeah, I was saying I do like Theo Johnson quite a bit. Sounds like I like him a little bit better than you do. I'm echoing now on your. Do you have a different headphone? Oh, no, now it's gone. Okay. Tim said Neil is ruthless. I said you weren't listening to me. I was telling you, feel free to. I was saying if his building was on fire. I wasn't saying I want you to leave. I was suggesting. I wasn't. Not.
Yeah. I think I did catch that part, but I couldn't hear 90% of what you said.
Yeah. No, I was just saying that I do like Theo Johnson. We haven't really seen it yet. I'm just maybe I'm just wish casting a little bit, but I'm he's 2,400, 15% ownership feels light for a guy who is running 80% of the routes and should be an end zone target, you would think, given his size. So I do like him a bit. I'll quite a bit. I'll be probably double the field, honestly. If he comes in at 15%, I think I'll lean into it a little bit with Theo Johnson. Hang on. Outside of Theo Johnson, I guess we have on the on the Giants, you could play Daniel Bellinger. Not somebody that I have been inclined to play. Do you have any interest in Belly?
I don't have him. 1,600 is pretty expensive for his quote unquote role. Yeah, I don't like it. Again, if you're playing large field tournaments and you're just gonna spread around your exposure to all these cheap guys and hope you get a touchdown, then yeah, sure, throw him in that bucket because he'll be on the field more than 0% of the time. But that's not really the approach I'm taking, at least right now. And he's expensive enough where I don't really see much reason to get to him a lot.
Yep, same page. Defenses and kickers. I really wanted to get into I'll just play the Cowboys, and then I saw they're projected for a ton of ownership. I don't know. I didn't see anything that stood out to me as a great play today as far as defenses and kickers. Let's see. In the flex, we have Greg Joseph at 21%. All right, these are lower numbers than I was seeing yesterday. Brandon Aubrey at 19%. Where are the Cowboys and the Giants? Did I miss them? I feel like I'm missing them.
What are you looking for? Cowboys ownership?
Yeah. I thought it was around 25% yesterday. And so I was just going to, okay, they're getting 0%. So this is just an error here. Yesterday I was seeing around 25% for the Cowboys, a little bit lower, but I think still 20% on the Giants. So to me, that was all right, I guess I'll stay away kind of. It's really the ownership is very important to me. Are you how much are you projecting them for?
Yeah, so if those are the ownership numbers, then I agree with you. I had lower when I ran my stuff today, and I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle because I had 12 to 13% flex ownership on Dallas and on the Giants. I had the Giants being optimal 15% of the time and Dallas being optimal 17 to 18%. Usually ownership just doesn't end up that far off of optimal percentages. So chances are ownership just ends up around 15 to 20%, I would guess. With the ownership projections I used, I was getting to a lot of both defenses. 32% flex for the Cowboys, 22 for the Giants. And one thing about the slate that I do kind of like for the defenses is that there's not a really strong mid-range of players because CeeDee Lamb and to a lesser extent Ferguson dominate targets so much for Dallas, and then Robinson and Neighbors for the Giants, and then Singletary dominates all the touches out of the backfield for the Giants. So you kind of have like the running backs for Dallas, you have Tolbert, but like there's not a lot in that 5-6K range. So I think that does make the defenses just look a little bit better because the opportunity cost is lower in that range. But also I will probably lose a little bit if those ownership projections come up.
Yeah, I think it's very much dependent on ownership, which I mean, that kind of is always the case. Pretty obvious that a lot of our decisions come down to what the ownership is. Yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see where the ownership comes out later in the day. Hard to have a real strong take now because it really is so dependent on where the ownership comes in on both teams. If both are, sub 15%, then I would have a lot of interest in the defenses. If they're 25%, 20%, then it becomes tougher to want to play them. Kickers, I don't have any great takes on kickers. I think always in play should be a high scoring game. Maybe they get stopped in the red zone. I don't have like a preference. Do you have any kind of preference between the kickers?
I mean, I guess Aubrey because he can kick the ball a mile, but I don't have a lot of them. So yeah, I only have like 10% Joseph, 8% Aubrey right now. Wouldn't be opposed to getting more, but I think that probably is an ownership thing where the ownership that I used this morning had both kickers getting more than the defenses. So I just ended up playing the defenses more. I think if defense ownership comes up and kicker comes down a little bit, it probably just balances out to where I'm playing, everything 15 to 20%.
Yeah. All right. Well, I need to get out of here pretty quickly because I am meeting Aha Bro for lunch. He is in town today, so that will be fun. Just down the street. Supposed to be meeting him in 3 minutes. He said he's going to be watching the show, so he knows where I'm at. So we will close it out though. But Adam, before we go, do you have a favorite play under $4,000? We got that question week 1. Went really well when you picked Alan Lazard. It's a tough question because it's sort of an arbitrary salary, but I thought it was a good question. I thought it's at least worth thinking about a little bit.
I mean, I think based on my exposures right now, it's either the Giants defense or Hunter Lipke.
Yeah, I think that those are both very solid answers. I'm probably with you. Yeah, I'm not seeing anybody else that I'm. Oh, Theo Johnson. Theo Johnson, I'll throw in there.
Yeah.
I'll say Theo Johnson is mine because I do like Theo Johnson quite a bit at 2,400. All right, good. There he is. He knows where I'm at. I will be meeting you in under sub 10 minutes, but might be close to 10 minutes. All right, Adam. Anything else you have going on the rest of the day? Where can people find your content this week coming up?
Yeah, nothing else going on for me today since there's no real baseball tonight. But you can find my content on the Endgame YouTube channel. You can find my content on the Endgame Syndicate website. You can find my NFL content through my Dub Club as well. So a lot of different ways to get to it.
Okay. Yeah. And of course, the links in the description of this video. Another reminder, please do subscribe to both of our channels. We are on the Flannelverse channel right now, trying to get to 3,000 subs. So appreciate anybody trying to help out. But also Adam coming on this show was not able to stream to his own channel. So just out of the goodness of his own heart, joining us on this one. If you would go reward that by subscribing to the Endgame Syndicate YouTube channel as well, would very much appreciate that. Thank you, Adam, for joining again. And thank you all for hanging out with us. We will catch you on Monday.